Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Janice looked at their faces and added, "What's scariest about Boss is his martial ability." Ryan and Sliver watched on as Jared gently moved his wrist. His long fingers seemingly possessed powers unimaginable as he twirled a dagger in them. The dagger looked extremely thin and was just a tad bit longer than a normal one. He raised his hand a little and the dazzling dark purple crystal inlaid on the hilt radiated a cold yet alluring glint. He then sank it straight into the monster's body. Ryan had just wanted to laugh that this was pointless and could not affect the monster at all. Yet, reality soon turned to slap him in the face as he saw a deep gash at the back of the knee where Jared had stabbed it, and it was unsteady like a person with a wounded leg. How could that be? Sliver also had a look of shock in his eyes. He had seen that his men's weaponry could do nothing to the monster at all, and yet, Jared managed to wound the monster with just a dagger. The monster seemingly sensed something as it let out an angry roar. Immediately after, it stretched its hand out to grab Jared. The latter pulled the dagger out and did not dodge the oncoming attack. Many thought that Jared could not react in time and would soon be squashed by the raging monster. Yet, Janice only stood there with an impassive face and did not move. Simon spat. "This is your idea of loyalty? To watch your boss die?" Janice straight up ignored him as he only gave him a faint glance before turning to look at Jared. "He's gonna die anyway. What's with the act?" Simon let out an audible tch. Many of Sliver's men thought that Jared was dead meat as they mockingly waited for the moment Jared was squashed. If that was the case, they could use the moment when their enemy is leaderless to seize their weapons back. Yet, Sliver could only frown as he looked at what was unfolding, seemingly still caught up in Janice's words. He watched Jared's almost unfathomable speed as he slowly said, "With what you've said, he is so strong, but why did he allow himself to be targeted by us?" Before their supposedly good ending would come, they saw the proud man had rushed forward and just deftly dodged the oncoming giant hand that was almost impossible to dodge with a backstep. He then sank the blade onto the top of the hand and used its momentum to propel himself onto the machine as he darted towards its neck along the line of the monster's arm. His speed was simply just too fast that the monster was stunned for a good 3 seconds. It was only then did it react in fury as it tried to frantically shake its head, trying to draw the bug on its back off. Unfortunately for it, the man was not thrown off, and instead, one of its fingers was shorn off by the dagger Jared had plunged into its hand. The monster let out a roar, and the damaged leg could no longer support its movements as its mechanical body collapsed half kneeling onto the ground. It then tried to use its mutilated fingers to try to grab Jared, who was still on its shoulders. Jared grabbed the monster's neck tightly with one hand and let out a smile after sensing its struggle. "So it's here." He put some strength into his leg and immediately leaped up. Jared landed straight onto the monster's back. The dagger in his hand gleamed in cold light as it fell and decapitated the monster. Unlike humans, who will bleed, the monster's neck was full of dense nervous cables. The fragile cables were hidden beneath its thick steel armor. As its head armor and body armor were almost connected together, it was as if the designer had chosen this design to ensure the weakness was exposed last. Everyone looked on in a daze as the massive monster used its mutilated fingers to grab the back of its neck as its mountain-like body shuddered and collapsed onto the ground. As it had lost one of its legs, its rickety appearance was particularly terrifying. Everyone else fled backward for fear of being crushed by it. Amidst the sizzling sound of the electric current, the black-clad man stood steadily on the shoulder of the monster. He gently wiped the dagger in his hand, the dark purple gemstone letting out a bright gleam. Yet, when in his hand, it paled compared to his radiance. It was as if shattered crystal fragments refracting all their brilliance onto a single point, causing it to be extremely awe-inspiring, powerful and fearless. Everyone looked at Jared in a daze. He had put away the dagger and slid down the monster's arm, and the speed he came down with kicked up a not-so-gentle gust. His black shirt was blown up, yet his eyes were completely indifferent. He deftly landed on the ground as the monster collapsed behind him. It was dusk, and the man's face was bathed in crimson. The moment he looked up, even the twilight did not seem all that eye-catching. Jared casually walked to Janice's side, and as he looked at Sliver before him, he let out an icy smile. The Intercontinental Party should look properly on which side should they stand with. For the interest of the party, it was either to fight him and the Terman family until the end or to govern soberly and allow him to run his business empire. Sliver was sufficiently agitated by this. His usually indifferent silver eyes were full of disbelief. He then quickly realized something and nodded solemnly. This was the best way to resolve it without resorting to violence. However, as he turned to look at the similarly shocked Ryan and Simon on the other side, a decisive look had already appeared in his eyes. Jared looked at the latter's expression and saw that he had completely given in. A look of faint disgust soon appeared in his eyes. Yet, Sliver did not notice it. He had always been doing things according to his principles. Since the man before him made him feel that he was the worthier choice, so he held his hand out and wanted to shake Jared's hand. It was as if the conflict earlier was just an illusion. Ryan, seemingly sensing something, looked at the scene before him in anger. Sliver looked at Jared as he said as if nothing had happened. As the representative of the Intercontinental Party, although the results are quite belated, I hope we have a pleasant working relationship. Jared only gave him a slothful look. Since the problem was dealt with, he straightaway walked out. Janice and his men immediately followed after, leaving Sliver where he stood. Seeing how unceremoniously he was ignored, the expression on his face stiffened, and a cold glint appeared in his eyes. He quickly walked before Jared and coldly questioned him. "What is the meaning of this?" Jared looked at Sliver and seemingly recalled something as he smiled, but just as quickly, he retracted the smile and coldly walked past the latter. "My wife told me not to get involved with you." He was quite the obedient one. Sliver did not expect such an answer. He had subconsciously thought that Jared was just being perfunctory. He wanted to get up to chase after the latter, but two clamp-like hands grabbed him tightly, causing him to not be able to take a step further. A menacing look appeared in Sliver's eyes as he looked at Janice. The anger in his eyes was palpable. Janice was, however, unfazed. He gave him a polite smile, yet his hands did not stop moving as he dragged Sliver out of the way. He then patted his hands together as if he had touched something dirty. Then, as if he recalled something, he looked at Sliver and said slowly, "You want to work with Mr. Jared now? That now depends on whether we want to or not." Janice gave Sliver a thoughtful look. After saying that, he then signaled his men to follow Jared out. On his way out, he dragged the terrified Simon, who was kicking and screaming, out, leaving only Sliver and Ryan sitting in the garden. Ryan looked at Sliver, who had always looked down on him, just sitting there on the grass, his head down, and did not speak for a good while. No one could see his expression clearly. When Jared got back, Nicole was explaining the blueprint to the members of the Terman family, with many admiring boys and girls surrounding her. Jared looked at the scene and raised his eyebrows slightly. Nicole immediately sensed it and looked towards the door. Their eyes met one another, and when Nicole saw him standing there looking cool, a smile appeared in her eyes. She gently motioned to pause the lecture before walking toward Jared. Many of the Branch family members looked enviously at the two. The boys were envious of Jared and the girl Nicole. From a certain level, the two of them were really a match for each other. Nicole looked at Jared, her eyes gentle as she asked, "How did it go?" She knew that he must have gone to resolve the issue with the Thorne family and the Federals. She knew very well that after Simon stole her blueprint, if they were to rush production day and night, this was about the time they would be able to produce a batch of defective mobile armor. Jared looked at Nicole, his eyes filled with tenderness. Everything went as planned. Nicole nodded. The two of them had already gone through all countermeasures, and everything had gone as they had imagined. Janice looked at Nicole in surprise. His eyes were filled with curiosity, and he was a person who could not hold his tongue, so he immediately asked, "You're the person who designed that monstrosity?" When Jared heard Janice's question, he immediately frowned and turned around to give the latter an icy gaze, so much so that Janice felt a chill down his spine. The latter then whispered, "What's wrong?" It was because he would always trigger his boss for no reason, and the latter would always look at him like this. Seeing that gaze, He immediately understood he was about to go back to a god-forsaken mining zone to be a hard-working staffer again. He desperately wanted to remedy that. If I cannot stay by boss side, then staying by the lady boss side is fine too. Even with that caution, he still had questions in his heart. When Nicole heard the question, she frowned a little and then turned to Jared. "What's that about?" Jared looked at her cold eyes and helplessly stroked her cheek as Janice said, something probably had gone wrong during production. It was extremely violent and had literally torn the Thorne family apart. If it weren't for Boss, that monster probably would have leveled the whole of Laurendale. Immediately after, he ignored Jared's icy gaze as he told her everything he saw. When he got to the rather gory part, he self-censored in consideration of Nicole being a lady. When Nicole heard what he said, she was slightly surprised. She had only left a series of false information on the most critical sections in the blueprint, and that would, at most, cause the mobile armor to fail to start. There was no possibility of someone creating a berserk monster out of it. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. At this moment, Simon was brought in by Jared's men. The latter was seriously traumatized, and when he saw Elijah standing in the middle of the crowd, he scampered over to his side. "Brother, save me." Elijah looked at Simon at his feet. He had already heard the conversation between Nicole and Jared, and so he asked Simon with a sullen look, "Do you know what happened with the monster that appeared in the Thorne family's place?" When Simon was asked that, the scene of him nearly being squashed into paste appeared in his mind. His face turned pale as he said, "Brother, I was wrong. I shouldn't have handed our mobile armor blueprint to Ryan. It's all my fault." A look of panic appeared in his eyes. Hearing Simon confessing his own guilt, Eber erupted in a fury. Just as he wanted to yell something, he heard Simon spilling everything out. "The reason I teamed up with Ryan is that I'm the ugliest in the family and the most with the least authority. I was just too angry. I wanted the master of the family to prove myself, and Ryan said he could help me. He told me that the Terman family has lost the government's trust, and then he would connect me to the Intercontinental Party and then allow me to take over the role of the patriarch from the one that is distrusted." Simon was scared out of his wits and told them everything. When Nicole heard it, she knew it went the way she had guessed. The moment Simon spoke about that terrifying monster, his entire person shuddered. Nicole was sure he was not lying, so she asked, "Do you know who created that monster?" When Simon heard it, a look of confusion appeared in his eyes. He lowered his head, seemingly trying to think, but in the end, he shook his head. "I'm not sure." He looked at Nicole. Her expression was calm and seemed trustworthy. Seemingly looking like she was encouraging him to continue speaking, he finally plucked up the courage to continue. "Ryan told me not to supervise the work. He went behind me to make a deal with the Federals. I suspect that the reason he kept me out of the process was to do something behind my back." Nicole looked at Simon's expression and figured that he was not lying. The latter was still in a state of surviving death, so his mental state was in tatters, and he should have no will to die. He had already lost all confidence in Ryan and the others, so the moment he saw Elijah, he spilled the beans on everything. Nicole turned to look at Jared. The two had an idea of what had happened at the same time. She gently tapped her index finger on the table, seemingly in thought. Elijah, standing by the side, knew that she had already gotten what she wanted out of him, so he turned to Simon before him and sighed. "Simon, it's too late for you to realize your faults now. You almost dragged the entire family into this quagmire for your own greed. Have you not considered that if Nicole had not come, and the other party got the traitor label to stick on us, how long can you be patriarch even if you manage to be one?" Elijah's dark green eyes opened with a pained look within. The Terman family can and will never forgive traitors. So, leave. For him to need to deal with two siblings in one day, a pained look appeared in Elijah's eyes. However, he was the patriarch of a huge family, and if he could not be fair with his judgments, then what should he do if someone were to betray the family for their own gain in the future? Nicole knew this very well as she looked coldly at Simon with nary any sympathy. One reaps what one sows. Moreover, Simon was not a good person even before his confession. Simon could not accept this outcome. When he heard Elijah's merciless words, a look of disbelief appeared on his face. Even Eber, who had always been nice to him, did not say anything this time. Yeah, Eber is a stickler to rules. He doesn't dare do anything that goes against the family creed, but I just made a mistake. Why must they hold on to this trivial matter and not give me a way out? Thinking of this, Simon gave everyone a resentful look, especially Nicole. She was the one who had encouraged him to tell everything, yet when he spilled the beans, she refused to help him at all. He could now see that the person Elijah valued the most was not his own son but this Nicole, who had popped out of nowhere. If she could speak up for him, even just asking for mercy, perhaps he might have a chance to stay in the family and continue to enjoy its wealth and power. Simon looked at Nicole as he slowly spoke. His tone was, however, almost directive. Nicole, I've told you so much. Why can't you help me say a word or two to calm Elijah down and allow me to stay? Nicole had never heard such a plea before as she looked on impassively at Simon before saying, I've not even settled the score of you sneaking into my room to steal the blueprint. I've only gotten you to admit what you did wrong so we can come up with a plan on how to salvage this mess. You think this is some sort of contribution? This entire mess is because of Simon's greed, and now he is the one feeling wronged. Simon looked at her. Her words were piercing, and he could not refute what she said. I've divulged so much because of her question. She could at least show me some gratitude. Why must they back me into a corner? Simon got up, his eyes reddened as he wanted to say something to Nicole. At that time, he wanted to stretch across the table to grab Nicole's clothes. Yet the moment he was about to touch her, he suddenly sensed a sharp chill that was so terrifying it was as if he had taken another step forward. He would be losing his hand. Simon looked up and saw Jared by Nicole's side. He was leaning lazily against the chair, playing with a dagger in his hand. It was that same dagger that decapitated the monster earlier. Cold sweat started to form all over his head. The man beside Nicole had always given him a harmless feeling that he, for a moment, forgot how brutal his blows were and how inhumanly strong he was. Simon immediately froze as he looked at Jared and started shivering uncontrollably, not even daring to withdraw his hand. Janice looked at Simon and sensed the chilly vibe coming from Jared. He immediately stood beside Nicole to support her. He then coldly said, "What were you thinking of doing there?" Simon's face turned pale. He gave Janice's neurotic smile a nervous glance before fleeing outside. That attitude of his is quite intriguing. Nicole gave Jared a thoughtful look, and he shot a smile back at her. It was only then did she look away and got up as she went upstairs. Jared, however, gently hooked in fingers, motioning for Janice to act before getting up and following behind Nicole. Elijah looked at the two and was a little startled. His subordinates were holding down the blueprint Nicole had sent over, and Jared did not make any demands from him. Perhaps Nicole had already told him. Eber came to his side and whispered, "Brother, do you think the two of them can deal with this matter?" Elijah put the blueprint in his hand down as he looked assuredly at the direction the two had left and said, "I don't know about the others, but Nicole, she's a woman of her words." Eber nodded. He believed Elijah, and after witnessing the strength Nicole had displayed this morning, he had to admit that he had gradually developed a trust in Nicole as well. It was the type of trust where disaster would surely pass if she was there. Elijah, seemingly recalling something, turned to Eber and frowned. "Things are still not yet settled. Go and drag Simon back. Otherwise, we'll be on the back foot again if we were to have another confrontation." Eber nodded and made a phone call to gather his men. He then gave his watch a glance before leaving with his men in tow with a serious look on his face. Elijah looked at the blueprint before him and let out a soft sigh before turning to the servant behind him and saying, "Go and look for Carl." Ever since that boy found out about Nicole and Jared's relationship, he seemed very reluctant to show up at home. God knows where he has gone to. Yet, Carl's voice rang out behind him, sounding somewhat flaccid. "Dad, you're looking for me?" Elijah squinted as he looked at his son before disappointedly slapping the blueprint into the latter's face as he said, "Go to the foundry and get the first batch out ASAP. If there are any flaws in them, just you wait." Carl gave him a slothful response before turning around and walking outside. Yet, his eyes earnestly scanned through every corner of the blueprint. The blueprints Nicole personally drew had always been terrifyingly accurate. This batch also probably required her to design the data chip herself. Elijah slowly raised his head and looked at the gradually darkening sky. He then recalled the words Elijah told him after Nicole had rejected him. The Terman family owes Nicole far too much. Even if she had rejected you, you must still be by her side. Even if she does not require your protection, you must still ensure that she is safe and sound. When Carl thought of this, his hand holding the blueprint grasped tightly. Yeah, without Nicole, there would be no Terman family. What am I doing feeling dissatisfied for? Jared and Nicole returned to their room. For the past 2 days, they had no chance to use the room together. The two were always separated during time off work and rest, so even if they were to use the same bed, there was no opportunity for them to share it. It just so happened today that the both of them had no business to attend to, so Nicole lazily leaned by the window as she raised her eyebrows and looked at Jared, who was seated facing her, and asked, "Out with it. What happened today?" When Jared saw her like this, a smile appeared in his eyes. He was sitting very naturally opposite her, but due to both of them having long legs, Nicole actually felt a little cramped as they sat before the huge French window. Seeing the man facing her showing a frown of dissatisfaction, the latter then went to her side and casually pulled her into his arms. He gently rubbed his chin over her head before finally replying with some satisfaction. When I got there just at the nick of time, Ryan and Simon were already locked inside the villa. It's Sliver's usual MO. I'm sure there's a gulf between the three of them now. Nicole nodded. She adjusted her position to allow her to lean into his arms more comfortably before motioning him to continue. When he spoke again, an incomprehensible cheer appeared in the man's voice. I've ordered Janice to personally contact the Intercontinental Party. Sliver's performance has been poor of late, and he's not even smart about it as a blade. With him failing against me so many times, I suppose the top brass must be very dissatisfied with him. If Janice was here, he would definitely be excited to tell Nicole about Sliver's flubbing. After all, when the Federals previously destroyed some of Boss' resources back then, he smacked them so hard that they spat everything out in restitution, and he even made a fortune out of it. What kind of brain does this man even have? Upon hearing Jared's words, Nicole could imagine Sliver's grim, livid face. When she was in the organization, he was the same as well. Everything he did was for his personal benefit, and if something went wrong, he would thoroughly snap. Sliver even wanted to represent the Federals to negotiate with me. Jared chuckled, his voice extremely clear. Yet when it rang by her ear side, it sounded extremely alluring. He actually thinks he's fit for that? When Nicole heard that, her eyes dimmed somewhat. She then turned towards Jared, with the look of good job in her eyes. Jared knew what she was thinking as he looked at her. Looking at her delicate face, a surge of emotions welled in his eyes. Nicole was just too cute in his eyes. Many times, he had to fully suppress his desire to kiss her with all his might. Like now. Seeing that he suddenly stopped talking, a curious look appeared in Nicole's eyes. She turned towards Jared. The man suddenly covered her eyes. He eagerly bit onto her lips and rubbed against them gently for a while. He wanted to do it gently as he pecked her lips again and again, then came the powerful deep kiss, not giving her any chance to react. Nicole was forced to take the kiss. The man's noble and cold scent rushed to the tip of her nose. Even though it was a clean smell, it felt extremely invasive after a while. It was like a beast finally having its facade cracked, yet she did not refuse him at all. She simply just closed her eyes. The forest after the rain became misty, and the fog slowly rose, yet there was also a much truer side to it. It was no longer only fresh and natural, it was also scarred and fraught with danger. Nicole was slowly opening herself up to him, and so was he. The two kissed for a long while, and by the time Jared let go of her, it was already dark. Only a few faint afterglows of twilight shone into the room, and as he looked at her, his eyes radiated both love and restraint. Love meant possession, and love meant fighting with himself and restraining himself to protect her. Looking at Nicole with a gentle gaze, he slowly said, "You're a kind person, Nicole, but I'm not." He placed her hand on his face. The rare coldness on it contrasted with the warmth of the palm. If I'm not as immaculate and perfect as your love, or if I'm much more sinister, dirtier than you had imagined, will you still choose me as you do right now? Jared looked deeply at Nicole, his eyes gleaming. His entire person felt like an ephemeral yet beautiful dream floating in midair. He was unable to fall, yet he could not bear the anxiety of hiding his true self either. He gave Nicole a look of a person who had gone all in as his hair dropped down. They were words that were gloomy and sad, yet he said them so smoothly and calmingly. Nicole looked at him and smiled. How many times do you want me to confirm that, She took the lead and placed both her hands on Jared's cheek, pulling herself up to kiss his face, kiss his beautiful eyes, kiss his tall nose, and then finally kiss his pale lips. Jared, in her eyes, was like the most beautiful landscape painting, with just the right shade, with nary a stroke, not a beauty engraved upon her heart. Jared stood still. Ever since the moment, Nicole said that he was like a statue, his expression totally retracted as he just looked at her. There is no truly good person in this world, she said cryptically. Yet, in Jared's ears, her words were like the sweetest mead. I can heal and also kill. I can be extremely stubborn for the things I stand for. I don't know when I made you feel so insecure. Nicole had finally completed her masterpiece. As she looked at Jared, she slowly let out a clear smile. I know who I fell in love with. So no matter what happens, I will love you, Nicole said with a deep gaze. No one can tell me if I can or cannot choose you. Only I know if I made the right choice, and there's no turning back when I do. At this time, Jared's heart was beating faster and faster. He could not hold it in any longer. He pressed against Nicole with his lower body and began kissing her passionately. Nicole was flustered. Nobody had ever wanted her like this before. But Jared forced himself to stop. Jared, get some rest. I've got to go. Oh. Nicole did not understand why Jared had to leave. She thought he was mad. But all she could do was bite her lips. She still did not know how to butter a man up. She felt disappointed when she saw Jared leave, but she quickly shook her head. Why are you disappointed, Nicole? Did you actually want him to continue? She thought to herself. The next day, the Turman family held a family meeting to announce Simon's execution, while the Thorne family suffered huge losses because of the monster. Moreover, the Throne family had a fallout with the Intercontinental Party. So, they lost the ability to fight back. The Turman family waited for their opportunity to fight back and gained the upper hand in a day with Jared's help. Thank you, Mr. Johnston, Elijah said when he waited upon Jared. Nicole really is the lucky star of the Turman family. She had brought Jared to cooperate with us against the Intercontinental Party and the Thorne family at such a critical time. We would not have done it without him, he thought. Well, my wife's the boss, Jared replied as he smiled at Nicole. This statement made a few people uncomfortable, especially Carl, who was standing behind Elijah. Then, Elijah returned to his senses and said, Thank you, Nicole. We couldn't have done it without both of you. Oh, it's nothing. After all, Carl and I are friends, Nicole said and smiled at Carl. Carl was down in the dumps these few days, but his sadness disappeared when he saw Nicole's smile. Yes, it doesn't matter what type of relationship we have as long as she's by my side, right? He thought. Things were coming to an end. Nicole had not talked to her family much these few days, but her elder brother still sent a message in the mornings. Mom and Dad must be worried, she thought. She then turned to Carl and Elijah and said, I'll leave the follow-up to you. There are still matters I need to attend to at school. Eber and the others looked at each other in dismay when they heard Nicole's words. Why does a genius like her need to go to school? They thought. Okay, I'll send someone to drive you, Elijah said. There's no need for that. I've prepared a private jet. We'll go back in an hour, Jared replied with a smile. He looked at Carl when he said those last few words as if to provoke anger. Carl ignored him and turned to Nicole. I'll be back in a few days after everything here is settled. The family matter has not been fully resolved, so Carl could not leave yet. Though, he would go with her in a heartbeat if everything was under different circumstances. You better stay here, Carl. You will be a target if you go back after this, Nicole said solemnly while everyone fell silent. Carl was the head of the house's son, but he rarely appeared in public in the past. This time, it would be different. Although the Thorne family had been suppressed for now, Carl would be their target once they regained their strength. It would be best if you followed the arrangement. Nicole had once exposed Carl's whereabouts when she answered his call rashly, but she will not make that mistake again. Carl felt helpless. He could only lower his head and say, "Okay." After Nicole felt reassured, she nodded and said, "I've got to go now." "Don't worry. We'll see each other soon." "Okay." Carl knew that they would meet again, but he was heartbroken to see Jared and her leaving together. Everyone began to say their goodbyes to Nicole and left after she and Jared got into the car. Elijah did not know what to say when he saw the disappointment plastered across Carl's face. So, he thought it would be best for Carl to figure it out on his own. Nicole and Jared were back in the country in less than half a day with the private jet. As she got off the plane, she yawned. "Still sleepy?" Jared asked with a smile on his face. "She was asleep the entire trip, but she's still sleepy?" He thought. "Well, I didn't get much sleep last night. I was up making improvements in the blueprints for the Turman family," she replied. Jared felt for her after he heard that. He reached out his hand to pat her head and said, "It breaks my heart to see you so exhausted." Nicole felt a warm sensation in her heart. When did this unaffectionate guy become such a romantic? She then looked back at him and said, "Aren't you mad anymore?" "When was I mad?" Jared frowned as he did not know what she was talking about. Nicole thought of what happened yesterday and felt a little embarrassed. When you left the room yesterday." Jared immediately understood what she meant. He then smiled playfully and whispered something into her ears. Nicole blushed. She did not know where to look. "Stop talking nonsense," she said. "When did he become like this?" "I'm not. What can I do when my wife is this attractive?" he teased. Nicole rolled her eyes and said, "Stop it. We're home. Don't scare my parents."
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.